Picture this. It's late June 2023 in Seoul, South Korea. It's 11 a.m. and you see hundreds of people lined up outside a building in Gangnam, one of the busiest and trendiest districts in the city, which you probably know from the music video Gangnam Style. There's excitement in the air and people are buzzing with anticipation. The line is so long that they even have ropes set up, with a bouncer-looking staff member holding an iPad, making the whole scene look like everyone is trying to get into some exclusive club. Except it's 11 in the morning. You think to yourself, this must be some kind of new Apple product launch or limited edition sneakers. So just out of curiosity, you walk to the front of the line to see what the hell is going on. And you realize that everyone is lining up for Five Guys. A burger. Wait, what? All these people are waiting for hours just to get a burger? Sure, Five Guys is a very decent burger franchise in the US. Definitely better quality than, say, McDonald's or Burger King. But in South Korea, that exact same burger has somehow been transformed into a kind of status symbol. People line up for hours and they take selfies with their burgers to brag about the experience on Instagram. For some reason, getting a burger at Five Guys has become a once-in-a-lifetime experience for many Koreans. And then you realize you saw the exact same level of buzz and crazy lines when Shake Shack arrived in South Korea back in 2016. There are also ongoing rumors that In-N-Out Burger could be entering Korea in the near future, although nothing has been officially confirmed yet. It's like all of a sudden, South Korea is seeing this invasion of burgers from the US, or I should say the West, because Gordon Ramsay Burger also arrived in Korea in 2021, and South Koreans just can't seem to get enough of it. Or have they? So why now? It's not like South Koreans have never tasted burgers. I mean, McDonald's and Burger King are doing relatively well in South Korea, and then there are ever popular Korean burger brands like Lotteria. But it's definitely interesting that we are seeing this influx of US fast food franchises, and even Canadian franchises like Tim Hortons, which arrived in South Korea in late 2023. And the more we looked into this, the more we realized there's a lot going on underneath that you might also find interesting, because it's got everything from secret marketing tactics to a slowing local economy to private equity firms and mega conglomerates looking to make money in an economic climate where it's getting harder and harder to make money elsewhere. So if you appreciate a good burger as much as I do, and I really do, then sit back, take a bite of all the fascinating insights we're about to feed you, because the rise and potential fall of US burger franchises in South Korea and the broader implications behind it need to be studied. But before we dive in, I just want to quickly talk about something that is directly related to how we bring you these insights from Asia. It obviously requires a lot of research and going through different sources. But I'm reminded every day just how difficult it is to actually get a clear, unbiased picture of what's going on, especially when it comes to Asia. Between sensational headlines, algorithm-driven feeds, and completely different narratives depending on where you're reading from, it's honestly very easy to get misled or overwhelmed. And that's exactly why we decided to partner with Ground News, which solves a problem I've been wanting to address for a long time. Ground News is not just a news outlet trying to sell you its version of the truth. It's a news comparison platform. You take any story, and Ground News shows you how it's being reported across the political spectrum, whether it's left, right, or center, so you can make up your own mind. And I think that's more important than ever, especially if you're trying to understand complex issues beyond just surface level headlines. For example, if you search Asia on Ground News, you might come across a story about how the International Energy Agency, or IEA, is releasing emergency oil stocks in response to the current tensions in Iran. What's interesting is that instead of seeing just one version of the story, you'll get multiple headlines from different outlets, along with a summary, but more importantly, a biased comparison. In this case, you can see that many of the sources lean slightly right, framing the IEA's move more as a security and market emergency. That level of transparency is incredibly powerful because it helps you understand not just the news, but how the news is being shaped. Honestly, this is the kind of tool I wish more people used before forming strong opinions. So if you're someone who wants to stay informed without being manipulated by algorithms or one-sided narratives, I highly recommend checking it out. You can subscribe to Ground News and get 40% off the Vantage plan by scanning the QR code on screen or by going to ground.news/boss or simply clicking the link in the description below. Back to the deep dive. In order to understand why lining up for Five Guys in South Korea makes any sense today, we first have to go back to a time when burgers weren't just food in Korea, they were a symbol. Because this isn't the first time an American burger captured the Korean imagination. In fact, the story actually begins decades ago when a simple burger represented something much bigger than just a beef patty between two buns for the vast majority of Koreans. Here's a fun fact. The very first US burger franchises to officially enter the Korean market was... no, not McDonald's. It was Burger King. They opened their first store in Seoul back in April 1984. But because we do our research, let's rewind even further, and I'll come back to that Burger King story later. The story actually begins all the way back in the 1950s during the Korean War. American soldiers stationed in Korea missed their food from home and began cooking simple American-style hamburgers on US military bases. At the time, South Korea was deeply impoverished, and beef was an incredibly rare and expensive luxury. But beyond just the ingredients, simply watching an American soldier eat a burger was a complete culture shock for many locals. Traditional Korean dining, shaped by centuries of shared dishes and reinforced during the hardships of the colonial and post-war years, was communal and slow, centered around multiple side dishes placed in the middle of the table. The American burger was the exact opposite. It was a single-serve, handheld, highly individualized meal meant to be eaten quickly and on the go. It symbolized a kind of Western modernity that South Korea was desperately trying to emulate as it rebuilt its war-torn economy. Seeing this fascination, local Korean street vendors in base towns like Itaewon in Seoul and Songtan in Pyeongtaek saw an opportunity. They watched the burgers the American soldiers were eating and decided to make their own. But there was a problem. They couldn't just go to a local butcher and buy fresh ground beef. Instead, they had to rely on the military black market. Vendors would illegally buy smuggled frozen meat, canned ham like Spam, and leftover rations from Korean workers on the US bases. Because real beef was so scarce, these vendors had to stretch the meat, often mixing pork with flour and onions to create their patties. To the average Korean citizens in the 1960s and 70s, the burger was a rare foreign novelty deeply associated with the American military presence. For decades, this was the Korean burger experience. You didn't go to a franchise, you just went to a street stall right outside the US military base. But as these street vendors continued to experiment and cater to American soldiers' late-night cravings, their makeshift recipes evolved into something truly iconic. By the early 1980s, this gave birth to a legendary Korean-American hybrid known as the Songtan burger, named after the military-based district in Pyeongtaek where it was created. They took these makeshift pork patties, threw them on cheap, sweet Korean bread, and because they couldn't get fresh American lettuce, they piled on massive amounts of shredded cabbage. They drowned it all in ketchup and mayonnaise, topped it with a fried egg, and wrapped the whole fucking thing lightly in aluminum foil. It was designed to be cheap, messy, and filling for hungry soldiers stumbling out of bars late at night. Man, just talking about this makes me hungry. Anyway, if you go to Pyeongtaek today, which houses Camp Humphreys, the largest overseas US military base in the world, you can still visit legendary old school spots like Miss Jin's or Miss Lee's hamburger. They've been serving this exact hybrid recipe right outside the base gate since the early 80s. It wasn't until 1979 that the burger was transformed into a massive corporate business in Korea. A Korean-Japanese billionaire named Shin Gyuk-ho, the founder of the Lotte conglomerate, had watched McDonald's enter the Japanese market in 1971 and explode in popularity. Realizing the fast food model was the future and that he could replicate the success, he created his own version, launching Lotteria in Tokyo in 1972. By 1979, the South Korean economy was booming, and Shin knew that it was time to bring the fast food concept to his home country. He knew that Koreans already liked the taste of hamburgers thanks to the military base influence and the supermarket patties. What Lotteria did was to take the version of the burger that Koreans already knew at the time and paired it with a highly efficient, industrialized American-style delivery system. They introduced brightly lit interiors, stainless steel kitchens, disposable packaging, and standardized menus. But more importantly, Lotteria heavily localized the food. They introduced items tailored specifically to the Korean palate, like the massively popular sweet bulgogi burger, which basically set the standard for what a fast food burger should taste like in Korea. It was a massive success and a defining moment in South Korea's food industry because Lotteria proved that the American fast food model could be incredibly profitable in Korea. And that success immediately caught the attention of other massive Korean conglomerates who realized they didn't need to build a brand from scratch and could just import the real thing. This is exactly what paved the way for the Doosan Group, a massive Korean heavy industry conglomerate, to buy the master franchise rights to Burger King. And in April 1984, Burger King opened that very first official US burger franchise in Seoul. Here's what's interesting. Burger King opened to the Korean public before it was even available to American troops on US military bases. The US military didn't sign its global fast food contract with Burger King until a month later in May 1984. Meaning a Korean local could buy a Whopper on the street before an American soldier could get one on base. Anyway, Burger King's opening in 1984 was highly anticipated, mostly among young people who were curious about Western culture, but it was viewed more as a premium dining curiosity rather than a massive pop culture event. A big reason for that was the price tag. In 1984, a Whopper was considered incredibly expensive for the average Korean citizen. Because of the high cost of importing ingredients, Burger King was effectively priced as a luxury meal. On top of that, remember how I said earlier that Koreans had gotten used to that sweet bulgogi taste thanks to Lotteria? Burger King's signature flame grill 100% beef Whopper had a very heavy, salty, and distinctively American flavor that many Koreans actually found a bit jarring at first. So while Burger King was technically the first to arrive in Korea, it took time for the public palate to adjust. The true cultural explosion wouldn't happen until 4 years later in 1988, when McDonald's finally entered the market. And boy, didn't McDonald's really change the game. McDonald's didn't just open a store, they staged an event. They perfectly timed the grand opening for March 1988, just months before the Seoul Summer Olympics. At the time, the entire country was obsessed with globalization. South Korea was desperate to shed its image as a war-torn developing nation and prove to the world that it was a modern, first-world economic powerhouse. And McDonald's knew exactly how to play into that ambition. Instead of opening in the older, historic districts of Seoul, like Burger King, they opened a massive, brightly lit flagship store in Apgujeong. For context, Apgujeong was like the Beverly Hills of South Korea, the absolute epicenter of new wealth, luxury, and trendy youth culture. Because of that strategic timing and premium location, the McDonald's opening was treated like an exclusive luxury drop. Hundreds of young, wealthy customers lined up around the block just to get a Big Mac. For the young and affluent Koreans of the late 1980s, eating at McDonald's was a profound status symbol, and for the next decade, business was absolutely booming. The South Korean economy continued to explode throughout the 1990s, and competitors rushed in to grab a piece of the pie. Wendy's, Popeyes, and KFC all flooded the Korean market. Then came 1997. The Asian financial crisis hit, and almost overnight, South Korea's economy collapsed. Disposable income evaporated, and spending premium money on an imported fast food burger suddenly seemed ridiculous. To survive this brutal economic downturn, American brands like McDonald's and Burger King had to fundamentally change their strategies in Korea. They could no longer rely on their luxury status. Instead, they had to compete aggressively on volume and price. They introduced cheap value menus, started offering delivery services, and leaned heavily into convenience. By the 2010s, the American burger had been completely stripped of its premium status in South Korea. Eating a Big Mac or a Whopper had become a normalized, everyday meal for Korean students studying for exams or office workers needing a quick, cheap bite. In other words, the American fast food burger in Korea had become exactly what it was back in the United States: cheap and functional. So if the perception of the American burger went from a rare curiosity to a status symbol luxury, and then finally to everyday fast food, what led to this massive resurgence? Why are premium American burgers suddenly dominating South Korea all over again? Let's explore that. So chances are, if you were used to a real savory American burger, you might not have recognized what burgers in South Korea had become during the 2000s and early 2010s. By that point, the trio of Lotteria, Burger King, and McDonald's had fully commoditized and heavily Koreanized the burger in order to survive the post-Asian financial crisis economy. To boost sales and appeal to local tastes, these brands leaned increasingly into sweet, localized flavor profiles that resonated with the Korean palate. It started with Lotteria inventing the sweet, soy-marinated bulgogi burger in the 90s, which was so wildly successful that McDonald's copied it, releasing their own bulgogi burger drenched in sweet marinated mayo. Even Burger King caved. They took their iconic flame-grilled beef and created the bulgogi Whopper, completely drowning the patty in a sweet teriyaki-style glaze. Because of this, for an entire generation, many Koreans legitimately thought that's what a burger was supposed to taste like: sweet. But then, something happened in the early 2010s. Bear in mind, we're still way before Shake Shack and Five Guys arrived. During this time, many Korean Americans began relocating to South Korea. I'm talking about US trained chefs and young Korean American entrepreneurs who grew up in the States. They understood authentic American dining culture and realized there was a massive hole in the Korean market for real, savory, high-quality Western food. At the same time, this was the era when social media food blogging and Instagram began to take off. Young Korean professionals in their 20s and 30s, many of whom had studied or traveled abroad, were actively seeking out these photogenic American dining experiences. And so began the era of the suje burger, which translates to handcrafted or gourmet burger. Basically, a wave of independent gourmet burger shops started popping up across Seoul. This movement was centered almost entirely in Itaewon, a neighborhood historically tied to the US military base, where many Korean Americans felt right at home. These independent restaurants completely rejected the cheap, localized fast food model. Instead of frozen patties and sweet bulgogi sauce, they brought in high-quality ground beef, thick patties, toasted brioche buns, and open kitchens. Suddenly, paying 12,000 won or roughly $10 for a burger made sense again, because it was being treated as a culinary experience rather than cheap junk food. You gotta give credit to the Korean American entrepreneurs because they had successfully proven that the Korean public was willing to pay premium prices for authentic American food experience. And that is exactly when the massive Korean conglomerates started paying attention, because there was a multi-million-dollar opportunity just sitting on the table. When you see brands like Shake Shack or Five Guys operating in Seoul today, you probably assume that their US headquarters did some great local market research, swooped in, and successfully marketed their burgers as luxury items. Before we did our research, I thought that too. I was like, man, good for them for nailing the Korean market strategy. Turns out, the US headquarters had almost nothing to do with it. They were strategically imported, carefully repackaged, and engineered by none other than the Chaebols, the massive family-owned conglomerates of South Korea. In case you don't know how big and powerful a Chaebol is, Hyundai is a Chaebol. Samsung is a Chaebol. To put that into perspective, the top four Chaebols, Samsung, SK, Hyundai, and LG, account for roughly 40% of South Korea's GDP, which is wild. One specific Chaebol, the SPC Group, realized that instead of building their own premium burger brand from scratch, they could simply import one of the hottest fast casual names in America, Shake Shack. If you live in South Korea, you interact with SPC Group almost every single day. They are the parent company behind Paris Baguette, Baskin-Robbins Korea, and Dunkin' Donuts Korea. The mission to bring Shake Shack to Korea was spearheaded by the vice president of SPC Group, who happens to be a second son of the chairman. He flew to the United States and reportedly spent years negotiating with Shake Shack's founder to secure the exclusive rights to operate the brand in Korea. In December 2015, SPC Group officially signed what is known as a master franchise agreement. Under this model, the US headquarters didn't have to spend a dime or take on operational risk to enter South Korea. SPC committed a multi-million-dollar development deal, the kind of capital commitment that no independent restaurant owner could realistically afford. They agreed to shoulder 100% of the real estate and operating costs, including some of the most expensive retail rent in Seoul, and pay an ongoing percentage of sale back to New York. In exchange, SPC gained control over how Shake Shack would be priced, marketed, and expanded within South Korea. And their strategy was a masterclass in corporate engineering. First, they didn't open multiple locations to test the market. Instead, in July 2016, they staged a massive, highly publicized grand opening of a single flagship store in the heart of Gangnam. Gangnam is the epicenter of wealth and status in Seoul. By placing Shake Shack there, SPC immediately signaled that it was a premium lifestyle destination. Second, because there was only one location in the entire country, SPC effectively restricted supply. This triggered the infamous open run. People lined up around the block in the sweltering July heat, waiting up to 3 hours just to get a freaking burger. The line itself became the marketing campaign. SPC understood that in the Instagram era, the wait was part of the experience. Scarcity created exclusivity. If it was easy to get, it wouldn't feel special. Finally, because SPC had to cover crazy Gangnam rent and pay royalties back to the US, they priced the burger at a premium, positioning them as fine casual rather than fast food. The result? The hype was so intense that within its first year, the Gangnam location became one of the highest grossing Shake Shack stores globally, reportedly outperforming many flagship locations in New York, London, and Tokyo. SPC's success in Korea was so strong that they later secured rights to expand Shake Shack into Singapore and Malaysia. A Korean Chaebol was now acting as a regional gateway for an iconic American burger brand. By successfully importing Shake Shack, SPC Group proved to other Chaebols that the American burger could be completely rebranded and turned into a highly profitable business model. And that success set off on a corporate arms race that would eventually bring Gordon Ramsay Burger, Five Guys, and even Tim Hortons to the Korean market. Let me cover Gordon Ramsay Burger and Tim Hortons in the next chapter because I want to tie that to the backfiring of the whole premium marketing strategy. Yeah, I know Tim Hortons is not even a burger franchise, or even American for that matter, but I'll come back to that. So that brings us back to Five Guys and the absolute peak of the open run campaign. Because if SPC Group wrote the blueprint for importing an American burger with Shake Shack, another Korean Chaebol, the Hanwha Group, perfected it with Five Guys. To understand how big of a deal this was, you have to know who was behind it. Hanwha is not a food company. They're a massive defense, aerospace, and energy conglomerate. That's right, they make missiles and rockets. But their retail subsidiary, Hanwha Galleria, wanted a piece of the premium food and beverage market. The project to bring Five Guys to Korea was entirely spearheaded by Kim Dong-sun, the vice president of Hanwha Galleria and the third son of the Hanwha Group chairman. This was a massive, high-profile project to prove himself within the family business. So what did Hanwha do differently from SPC? From a marketing standpoint, absolutely nothing. They copied the Shake Shack playbook almost line for line. In July 2023, they opened a massive 2-story flagship store right in the heart of Gangnam, the exact same ultra-wealthy, high-foot traffic street where Shake Shack launched. They were pretty much right next to each other. And just like Shake Shack, Hanwha deliberately restricted supply by opening only one store for the entire country. The open run crowds were so massive that people literally camped out overnight in the pouring monsoon rain, waiting up to 12 hours just to be the first inside. Even after the initial frenzy, the average wait time was around 3 to 4 hours, forcing Hanwha to use a digital ticketing system just to manage the chaos. Get this, some people were even trying to resell their spot in line online for over 1,500 US dollars. To justify their premium prices, Hanwha leaned heavily into American authenticity. They spent months figuring out how to source specific potatoes in Korea to match the American russet potato. They insisted on using authentic peanut oil for frying, and they even imported the iconic free boxes of peanuts for customers to eat while they waited. They took a casual paper bag American burger and successfully packaged it as an exclusive Gangnam certified luxury event. But while their marketing strategies were identical, their business strategies were completely different from the SPC Group. You see, SPC Group imported Shake Shack to build a long-term empire, holding onto the rights and eventually using Korea as a launch pad to expand the brand into Singapore and Malaysia. Hanwha, on the other hand, treated Five Guys exactly like a tech startup. They didn't want to run a burger empire forever. They wanted to execute a highly profitable exit. When Hanwha launched the brand in 2023, they reportedly invested roughly 20 billion won, which is about 15 million US dollars. Thanks to their massive marketing machine and the viral open run hype, they aggressively scaled the brand to 7 highly profitable locations. By 2024, the Korean Five Guys operations was pulling in 46.5 billion won, or roughly 33 million US dollars in sales and turning a healthy operating profit. And the very second they proved the business model was profitable, Hanwha cashed out. To whom? Enter private equity. Just 2.5 years after the viral grand opening in Gangnam, Hanwha officially sold the Five Guys Korean operations to H&Q Equity Partners, a domestic private equity firm. The final price tag? Roughly 60 to 70 billion won, or about 45 to 50 million US dollars. Tripling your investment in less than 3 years is not bad, right? Now, if you don't know what private equity is, the easiest way to understand it is to think about house flipping, but for corporations. A private equity firm buys a business, completely guts its expenses to make the cash flow look as profitable as possible, and then sells it a few years later to the next buyer for profit. And this is the ultimate truth of the modern Korean burger market. It's no longer just about food or even social status anymore. These so-called high-end American burger franchises have become financial assets, built with hype, scaled with capital, and structure for eventual exit to private equity. But as we're about to see with Gordon Ramsay Burger and Tim Hortons, the strategy of squeezing maximum profit out of the Korean consumer is finally starting to backfire. So if things have gone so well with Shake Shack and Five Guys, and Chaebols and private equity players are making serious money, you would think they will be eager to bring even more Western burger brands into Korea, right? Just inject massive capital, apply the same open run hype strategy, and cash out. Well, in some cases, that's exactly what happened. Gordon Ramsay Burger arrived in Korea about 2 years before Five Guys, and predictably enough, it drew massive attention online. Honestly, at this point, you'd be surprised if a famous foreign food brand launched in Korea and didn't receive nationwide media coverage and crazy social media hype. But the real question is this: how sustainable is that hype? Do any of these brands actually die out? To understand this, we have to look at why industry experts often consider the Korean market to be the ultimate global testbed for launching new products. And I'm not just talking about burgers. This applies to tech apps, cosmetics, and luxury fashion. Why? Because South Korea is a hyper-dense developed country with an internet and mobile penetration rate hovering near 100%. Like, everybody's digitally connected. On top of that, the population is extremely trend sensitive. Get this, Korea's overall social media penetration sits at 94.7%. Industry trackers report that South Koreans collectively spend over 378 million hours a month on Instagram alone. More importantly, Korean consumer culture is heavily driven by social comparison. People are constantly comparing their lifestyles, their clothes, and their weekend plans to what they see on their feeds. So if you're a brand trying to stress test the product, its pricing, packaging, customer service, even its Instagrammability, Korea is basically a live fire exercise. And this brings us to the core of the Korean market paradox. Because everyone is so connected online and so eager to showcase their lifestyle, a brand can and often does go instantly viral and achieve nationwide fame overnight. But that exact same ecosystem is also brutally efficient at killing hype. When people wait 3 hours in line for a $20 bacon cheeseburger from Five Guys, they aren't really paying for the burger. They're paying for the Instagram post. They're paying for the social proof that they were part of the cultural zeitgeist. But what happens after you post that one photo? The utility of the burger pretty much drops to zero, unless the food is actually good in that it's worth the price tag. So let's say that the Chaebols and private equity firms successfully condition Korean consumers to view a foreign fast food joint as a luxury experience. What is the actual price ceiling for that luxury? In other words, how much are Koreans actually willing to pay for the experience? This is exactly where we are seeing the slow decline of the Western premium burger trend. If you visited Shake Shack or Five Guys today in 2026, during the busiest lunchtime in the heart of Gangnam, you probably wouldn't even have to wait in line. All the hype and magic are gone. Why? Because people eventually did the math. They realized it's simply not worth paying nearly $20 for a burger, fries, and a drink at Five Guys. You could easily get a decent Korean meal for half the price just down the street. But if people aren't willing to pay that kind of money for Five Guys burgers, imagine their reaction to Gordon Ramsay burger, which took the premium pricing strategy to a level that many felt bordered on insulting. In 2023, Gordon Ramsay burger launched an exclusive, limited edition menu item in Korea called the 1966 burger. The price? A staggering 140,000 won, around $100 for a single hamburger. Sure, it comes with truffle and high-end steak, but many reviews criticize the price, saying it simply wasn't worth the money and that they wouldn't return for a second visit. Now, to be fair, this aggressive pricing might not be entirely Gordon Ramsay's fault. As I said, it's the Korean Chaebols and conglomerates operating these franchises that are setting the ridiculous prices and playing by the same private equity playbook. They saw the hype and the opportunity to make money, and they try to squeeze every single dollar out of the Korean consumers, thinking the luxury narrative would stick and people would keep paying just because a brand was famous. But they went too far. You could even say they completely misread the market. The reality today is that South Korea, much like the rest of the world, is experiencing a severe cost of living squeeze. Consumer sentiment has fallen so sharply that some economic commentators say that the mood now feels similar to the period right before the 1997 Asian financial crisis. Food prices are insane. The Korean currency, the won, is at its weakest point in years. And a lot of Koreans are straight up refusing to eat out anymore, no matter how much they want to show off their lifestyle on Instagram. So what happened to Gordon Ramsay burger? Realizing they could no longer sustain a profitable business just selling $25 burgers to a shrinking pool of luxury diners, the conglomerate running the franchise had to pivot. In 2023, they launched Gordon Ramsay's Street Burger in Korea, a much cheaper, more casual spin-off brand aimed at the mass market. It was a quiet admission that the luxury fast food illusion had fundamentally cracked. But the most outrageous example of this price gouging strategy isn't a burger joint, it's Tim Hortons. If you're from Canada, you know Tim Hortons as a cheap, working class, everyday coffee shop. It's where you go to get a cheap donut and a coffee before work. But when the brand launched its massive flagship store in Gangnam again in late 2023, the Korean franchise operators completely rebranded Tim Hortons as a premium cafe. A medium black coffee in Canada costs around $1.80. In Seoul, they charge roughly double that. And they expected the exact same open run hype. But Korean consumers saw right through it. They heavily criticized the pricing online. The hype died almost instantly. And today, you can just walk right in without waiting. But here's the $1 million, or I should say $1 billion question. Do the Korean conglomerates actually care? And the truth is, no, they probably don't. Despite the consumer backlash and the economic downturn, these massive corporations will likely keep importing famous Western brands into Korea. Why? Because to them, it's not about building a sustainable 20-year restaurant legacy. Even if it wasn't their original intention, the goal now seems pretty clear. It's a pump and dump. If they can manufacture 6 months of insane hype, open a few decently performing flagship stores, and artificially inflate the brand's valuation, they can flip it to a private equity firm for a massive profit, just like Hanwha did with Five Guys. Once the private equity firm takes over, they will squeeze every last drop of profit out of the deal before flipping it to the next guy, because that's their job and they're very good at it. And who really pays the price for this corporate arms race? I say it's two groups. Number one, it's the independent restaurant owners, including the original Korean American entrepreneurs. 10 years ago, if you wanted an authentic, high-quality American smash burger in Seoul, you went to an independent spot in Itaewon, built by passionate chefs who actually cared about the culture. But today, those independent owners simply cannot compete. They don't have millions of dollars to secure prime real estate in Gangnam. They don't have the massive marketing budgets to manufacture an open-run spectacle. And when the Chaebols artificially drive up the cost of commercial real estate by opening these giant vanity flagship stores, the independent owners just get priced out of their own neighborhoods. Number two, caught right in the middle is the Korean consumer. They're finally starting to realize that the dream of having all these famous Western brands in their backyard isn't all it's cracked up to be, especially when they cannot even afford to eat there. Either way, you'll probably see a lot more American brands entering the Korean market in the near future. Just recently, in 2025, In-N-Out Burger held one of its infamous flash pop-ups in Seoul, and people started lining up at 3 a.m. just to get a wristband. And on top of that, SPC Group, the exact same conglomerate that started this whole craze with Shake Shack, just announced they're officially bringing Chipotle to South Korea in 2026. In fact, in preparation for entering the Korean market, Chipotle has already filed a legal dispute against a Korean individual who owns the domain chipotle.co.kr, which includes its brand. So it seems the corporate wheel will keep turning, at least for now. And if I had to take a guess where this is heading, the food and beverage market in Korea may become increasingly polarized. On one end, you have ultra-cheap meals from convenience stores, which, by the way, are also totally owned by the conglomerates. On the other end, you have overpriced foreign franchise brands positioned as premium dining experiences. Meanwhile, the traditional middle of the market, the casual, reasonably priced mid-tier restaurant, is being squeezed out of major Korean cities. In other words, the middle is disappearing. So the next time you see a massive line outside a brand new American burger or fast food joint in Seoul, now you know exactly how things work. Hopefully you won't be as surprised, and you will also remember that what you're witnessing isn't just a trend, it's a reflection of a much larger economic machine at work. If you found this video insightful and felt like you learned something new, I also want to let you in on something that you might not be aware of. Our analytics show that only about 23% of you watching right now are actually subscribed to our channel. And I'll tell you why that's important. Because we put so much time and effort into our research, we really can't upload on a fixed schedule. So unless you actually subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell, the algorithm will often just bury our latest video. What that means is that when a new video comes out, sometimes you won't even see it, even if you're a regular viewer. So if you regularly watch our videos, not just because of the topics, but also because of how we deep dive and break things down, do yourself a favor and subscribe and turn on notifications. It'll really help us reach more viewers and continue doing deep dives on more interesting topics from Asia. We're just really passionate about bringing the most authentic and in-depth insights from Asia. Personally, I love learning about different topics and issues, especially interesting company histories, economics, and technology. So let us know what we should cover next. For example, should we do a deep dive on why Chinese AI has become so advanced? And if so, what kind of questions should we be asking? You can participate by leaving comments, emailing us, or filling out the form in the description if you'd like to join our future live streams. The goal here is to build a real community of culturally curious people and future leaders who help power the content we create. And I really hope you'll be part of it. Of course, I'm Stephen Park. Thanks for watching all the way till the end. As always, stay curious.